The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Well, it's good to see you all. I've got some bits and pieces that have come up over the last few months that I'm going to try to put together. When I was one of them, when I was at our hermitage this spring. Of course, you know, when we're in retreat, a lot of things come up. One hopes that one remembers it all. But some of the key points from that time, I've been reading after Reverend Master Daishin's retreat and those lovely talks on the Buddha's teaching from the Pali Canon. I was inspired to read more of some of the Buddha's sutra, the early sutras, and looking in this book, the Bhikkhu Bodhis, in the Buddha's words. I came across, in the small amount that I've read so far, the phrase that the Buddha often uses in many of his sutras, his teachings, to pay careful attention. That term, careful attention. So we'll hold that as one of the pieces. I was reminded today when Reverend Master Jiu talked with her monks, she would often refer to her talks or her lectures as weaving a tapestry. You know, she bringing many threads together, threads of the Dharma together from various directions, and she would ask our patients in following these, because often we want to get one thread and, you know, find the point of it, and she would sometimes leave us hanging on one at the end of one thread, and then there'd be another thread she'd pick up. And so if you know what that's like, if you've done any sewing, you know what that's like. You have to put various pieces of the garment together or the tapestry together. Well, that was helpful to remember that, because I feel like I'm attempting to weave a tapestry here as well. So one of the pieces is careful attention. And we've had a lot of talks on mindfulness recently, and attention as it happens. Our abbess gave us a talk the other day, a wonderful talk on that. And I'm going to maybe look at it through a little different window today. The other piece is somebody, one of my dear fellow monks, and I were talking about ceremonies, and she was saying she had a little trouble with some of the ceremonial, or trying to understand it. For example, we a while back celebrated a Shurangama ceremony when that car fire was raging, and of course we've got more fires raging now, and we decided to do this ceremony to basically pray for help and ask for protection and offer merit and really for the benefit of all who are suffering as a result of fires. But this person said, and I know we often might have this occur to us, that, you know, she had a little trouble with this. Does it make sense to do a ceremony like this? How does it help? And I realized there's an awful lot about ceremonial that would be good to pay careful attention to, and so I'll talk a little bit about why we do that. And then the other piece is, recently I've been becoming aware of how in our world these days we have so many views and opinions going about, and we seem to have access to more and more views and opinions, more than we can possibly. Our poor little brains are completely overwhelmed with them, I think. Even if we don't go on the internet very often. And unfortunately, many of these views and opinions are in conflict with each other, and it seems that it's easier, and so I've heard this from others, somebody's even written a book about it, I think, that it's easier to attach to a particular view and kind of run with it and get people to support you, you know, with the internet as it is. Now, I'm not putting down the internet entirely. It has many wonderful virtues and can be used in the service of good. But this is one of the potential problems you can, you know, hashtag or attach to. a particular view and run with it. And, even families are being broken up, apparently, with this phenomenon of attaching to views and then becoming conflictual, people putting their blinders on, as it were, So I've been reflecting on this, and I came to realize that a good deal of our practice is about cultivating and finding right view. And so it led me to a little bit of an exploration on right view with a capital R and V, the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. So let's see if we can tie all these things together. Yeah. The Buddha, in his phrase, careful attention, and actually with regards to right view as well, emphasized that the things that we need to pay particular attention to are the characteristics of existence. The fact that there is dukkha, suffering. All of us, life inherently has some suffering in it, and it's good to sit still with that and to explore it and to find out the causes of it. Also, the other one being anicca, that all things are impermanent. There is a constant flow, nothing that we can really hang on to. Things are always changing. We're from one second to the next, not exactly the same people that we were in the previous second. This is just a natural characteristic of our existence. And the other one being anatta, that there's no permanent self, nothing absolute there that we can fix a view to. And yet, of course, we have an identity. We live our lives as best we can. We have temporary identities, but they're not something that we have to cling on to. They're not absolute. They're not completely substantial. And that the reason why we suffer is because we have depended on, relied on these views and this self that creates these views. This self that isn't actually substantial. So it's these things to pay careful attention to and how these manifest in our lives. So I'm going to suggest that when we pay careful attention in this way, we begin to find a view that is beyond all views. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about how in our practice we come to that. Looking at the term view in the dictionary, one of the 7 definitions, that was a long list of definitions for the word view. One of them is to survey with the eyes, and to survey mentally. Yeah. So that's actually a very helpful way of looking at contemplation in our lives, how to cultivate right view, to survey our reactions, survey our experience, our lives, our thoughts, our speech, our actions, with the teachings of the 3 characteristics: suffering, dukkha, anicca, anatta. Are we attaching to things? Are we ignoring suffering? Are we expecting something to remain the same? So it's an aspect of our practice each day to do a contemplation of the day's events and to survey in this way. And this helps us actually to loosen our grip on our limited views, our opinions that become fixed. Of course, it doesn't mean that, and I'm sure enlightened people it's not that they don't have views, that they don't vote perhaps, or that they don't make decisions. It doesn't make you into a mindless, wobbly, wimp, as it were. One can have ideas that, oh gosh, if I let go of all this, who am I going to be? Well, that's the whole point, is there is that which is beyond all of this that we can settle into, that we can relax into. We begin to look with the eyes of a Buddha. We begin to settle into our original nature. In meditation practice, one of the ways that I think of it is opening a space, letting go of everything, really, not grasping after a permanent self, after something, our desires, not following them down the garden path when we're meditating, at the same time not pushing away that which appears before us, embracing it, giving it attention, and then letting it go. But we create a space there so that right view, as it were, can appear, so that we can begin to see with the eyes of a Buddha. And as the Thai forest master, Ajahn Chah, as he says, to begin to know, to become one with that which sees, that which knows. There is that which knows, which is beyond our intellectual knowing and our temporary knowledge and intellectual knowledge. My experience, it came to me that right view is something that's always perfecting itself. We're not trying to nail it down. The Buddha wasn't suggesting we nail this down. In other words, we have this particular concept of what we're aiming at. At the same time, we have to always hold it lightly and allow it to, the water of the Spirit, as it were, loving kindness, to flow through it so that it can perfect itself. And thus, it's always flowing, it's always changing, and there's an unchanging within that changeableness. We don't have to fix it or improve on it. And at the same time, we can give expression to it in our lives. A seeming paradox, but something, it does work. So it's a matter of just doing the practice to find out. So it's a view that's opening, becoming wider, more open of heart, more still, more real, seeing things as they really are. Certainly for me, this is what brings true peace of heart and mind. And I think our world could use a lot of that right now. So any one of us doing that, and all of us doing that, is already huge. And so if you can imagine just spreading that out, letting that flow to others in our ordinary daily interactions, how powerful that really is, actually. In a world where there are a lot of, we're often torn apart by conflicting views on many matters, it can create a certain distress. I can find myself, after reading some things on the news, experiencing a certain degree of distress. And I've begun to see that as my, the Buddha nature, if you like, pointing me to a view that's beyond all of this. I can take it in, I can offer merit, have sympathy, but I find that I can't just go running with any one of these things often that I read about. I need to consider, what is the right view here? Right view is sometimes called right understanding, right intention as well, as the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. So it's really the point of departure, if you like, for all other aspects of training. And every time we sit down to meditate, again, as I mentioned, I feel that we're aligning ourselves more with this right view of the Buddha Dharma. A couple of things the Buddha has said in some short sutras, or parts of them, I'll quote for you. He says, a world in turmoil. Now this is 2,500 years ago, right? The origin of conflict. This is part of a sutra. The Brahmin Aramadanda approached the Venerable Mahakachana. Oh, this is one of the Buddha's disciples, actually, that he's approaching, and exchanged friendly greetings with him and asked him, "Why is it, Master Kachana, that Khatiyas fight with Khatiyas, Brahmins with Brahmins, and householders with householders?" The various castes, and parts of society. And the Venerable says, "It is Brahmin because of attachment to sensual pleasures, i.e. greed, adherence to greed, or sensual pleasures, fixation on sensual pleasures, on greeds, addiction to greed, obsession with greed, holding firmly to sensual pleasures, that Khatiyas fight with Khatiyas, Brahmins with Brahmins, and householders with householders," i.e. fundamentally selfishness. This is why when we, so if we find ourselves getting into fights with others, it's good to look Look at, where our greeds lie. What are we wanting here that is in conflict with others, the wants of others? And then the Brahmin asks again, why is it, Master Kachana, that ascetics fight with ascetics? So even religious seekers. It is, Brahmin, because of attachment to views, adherence to views, fixation on views, addiction to views, obsession with views, holding firmly to views, that ascetics fight with ascetics. Now, isn't that interesting? Very simply stated, but to me it speaks to some of the causes for all these strife, all the wars and the conflict that we've experienced over the centuries. If you study even a little bit of history, you know that religions have been at war with each other. So isn't that interesting? This very simple teaching goes really to the heart and the root of so much of our conflict. So what's the remedy here? The meditation practice. We have to do the practice of just sitting still and letting go and allowing the truth to arise and allowing ourselves to see, does this really matter? Is this really worth clinging to? Is it truly in harmony with my true heart? Is it in harmony with the hearts of other beings? Is it in harmony with the precepts? I'm going to read you another one because I don't want to sound too dismal, but it's just interesting that the Buddha talks about this going on so long ago, and it's just, as our masters have often said, the world is ever thus, and we keep wanting to fix it, but where in fact we have to transcend it, have to let go of it, and live in the world as if in the sky, as our scripture says, live in the world as the lotus blossom, not wetted by the water that surrounds it, doing our practice rooted in the mud of the world, but not of the world. So here's another one that's called, Why Do Beings Live in Hate? Saka, the ruler of the Devas, asked the Blessed One, the Buddha, beings wish to live without hate, harming, hostility, or enmity. They wish to live in peace. Yet they live in hate, harming one another, hostile, and as enemies. By what fetters are they bound, sir, that they live in such a way? Well, the Blessed One said, Ruler of the Devas, it is the bonds of envy and niggardliness, miserliness, I guess that would be as well, that bind beings so that although they wish to live without hate, hostility, or enmity, and to live in peace, yet they live in hate, harming one another, hostile, and as enemies. This was the Blessed One's reply, and Saka delightedly exclaimed, So it is, Blessed One, so it is, Fortunate One. Through the Blessed One's answer I have overcome my doubt and gotten rid of uncertainty. Then Saka, having expressed his appreciation, asked another question. But, sir, what gives rise to envy and niggardliness? Do we all know what niggardliness is? Yeah? Selfishness of a type. Jealousy and miserliness. Pettiness, I suppose. Is there another definition for that? Meanness. All right. What is their origin, he asks. How are they born? How do they arise? When what is present do they arise, and when what is absent do they not arise? Envy and niggardliness, ruler of the Devas, arise from liking and disliking. This is their origin. When they are absent, they do not arise. But, sir, what gives rise to liking and disliking? They arise, ruler of the Devas, from desire, greed. And what gives rise to desire? It arises, ruler of the Devas, from thinking. When the mind thinks about something, desire arises. Interesting connection to make, isn't it? When the mind thinks of nothing, desire does not arise. So you can see the importance of our practice of when we sit to not try to think and not try not to think. There's a reason why Great Master Dogen emphasized this. It's not like we are getting rid of the thinking mind, but we're not attaching to it. And that is huge. That is just huge. And then he goes on to say, but sir, what gives rise to thinking? Thinking, ruler of the devas, arises from elaborated perceptions and notions. When elaborated perceptions and notions are present, thinking arises. When elaborated perceptions and notions are absent, thinking does not arise. So there again, the importance of not allowing our views and opinions to become hardened, because we can identify with them so strongly that they become an elaborated perception that we can't escape from. And we just go round and round and round at the risk of... I don't want to sound dismal, but here's another little metaphor that might help with that. It's called dog on a leash. Monks, this samsara is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. There comes a time, monks, when the great ocean dries up and evaporates and no longer exists. But still, I say, there's no making an end of suffering for those beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. So again, attached to our ignorance, attached to our opinions, our greeds. Anyway, I'll skip ahead here a little bit. Suppose, monks, a dog tied up on a leash was bound to a strong post or pillar. It would just keep on running and revolving around that same post or pillar. Sound familiar? So too, the uninstructed worldling, or person who doesn't have any sense of the practice, regards form as self. In other words, identifies with the form completely. Feeling as self, perception as self, volitional formations as self, consciousness as self. In other words, our experience of our lives as absolute. The skandhas as being absolute. Our bodies, our minds, our feelings, our perceptions as being truth. How many times have we had the experience of having a feeling arise and being absolutely convinced that it's right, and then within seconds another piece of information comes in and we realize, we feel totally different, right? Or something cheers us up and we feel totally different, if we're miserable. So observing this over the years, we begin to realize, this isn't quite as substantial. There isn't anything absolute here. So, but if we believe that, if we attach to them, if we believe that they are, then we're like a dog that just keeps running and revolving around form, around feeling, around perception, around volitional formations, around consciousness. As this dog keeps on running and revolving around them, he's not freed from them. I'll skip a few things here. He's not freed from birth, aging, and death, from sorrow, lamentation, etc. So again, the Buddha is telling us what not to do here. Another good reason to meditate. Reverend Master Chiyu, I think, often used the term the third position, and I had that come up very strongly, that to my mind, and I've been needing to practice that. It's a practice of placing ourselves in the third position. To my mind, this speaks to what right view is as well. That there is that which is beyond the opposites. There is a third position. There is a true refuge in which all things are embraced, in which we see things as they truly are. And since we've had a chance to honor her today and reflect on her many virtues and her teachings, which we're gratefully able to do, today we celebrated the monthly celebration. We don't do it every month, but as much as possible we do this memorial for her every month. And we're so grateful to be able to go around the stupa, to be outdoors. The weather's still good enough to do that. And be with her where she's buried. So it's a good day perhaps to reflect on her teaching of the third position. When we're faced with conflicting views, when we're faced with argument, when we're faced with conflict, with having to make decisions, difficult decisions in our lives, or when we're faced with dukkha, anicca, anatta, the sense of nothing to hold on to. There is a third position. There is there is a refuge that's always perfecting itself and that's always flowing. We don't have to nail it down. One of my little teachings that comes up in my mind from time to time is when we create this space in meditation, sitting still in the silence, we begin to let the eternal get a word in edgewise, you know. Sometimes something taps me on the shoulder and says, let the eternal get a word in edgewise. Because, again, the elaborated perceptions and notions that the Buddha talks about, you know, that sort of churn around in there, we have to just stop that. Just say stop once in a while. Sit still. You tell yourself to sit still and allow that which is truly helpful to come up and to arise. There's always something that is there to help us if we're willing to just sit still for a moment and have the humility and patience to let it be, and without, as much as possible, without expectation. One of the reasons we do ceremonial, I began to realize in doing a ceremony, we're kind of coming together. As one aspect of it is to set up a right view together, a right intention. Yeah, doing the Shurangama ceremony for the benefit of those suffering from fires and so on. Backtracking a little bit, you know, it's an old Mahayana tradition to do the Shurangama ceremony regularly. In China, it was often done during times of drought, during times of great strife and difficulty. In many Mahayana monasteries, if they're big enough and they have enough monks, they do the ceremony every day. And that ceremony goes through all the various fears and attachments and problems that we might be experiencing in our lives. It covers just about everything, and talks about being mindful. By being mindful of fear of such and such, may I be cleansed. In other words, we're cleansed of negative karma. We're cleansed of the suffering by being mindful, as the Buddha said, paying careful attention of these fears, of what we're holding on to. But it occurred to me in reflecting on the purpose of the ceremony that we're not necessarily trying to control the weather or trying to control people's actions, which we can't do except our own. We're not trying to necessarily fix the world, but we're coming together with an intention to cleanse our own hearts of greed, anger, and delusion, to offer any Dharma from that we can, to open our hearts to connect with other beings in sympathy who may be suffering, the intention to keep the precepts, to follow the truth that arises from our practice, mindfulness of our thoughts, speech, and actions, and bringing them into harmony with the Dharma, with our original nature. I'm sure you all have experience of what happens at a ceremony. Of course, we have to pay attention. The Buddha did have a teaching, in the old teachings of the Buddha, in the old Theravadan teachings. They talk about the various fetters that one needs to overcome or let go of before one has realization of the truth at various levels, if you like. The first one being called the stream enterer. Sometimes we call that the first Kensho in Zen training. The first, real understanding of our Buddha nature, of the truth. And one of the fetters, among a few others, is attachment to ritual. Yeah. So in the Buddha's time, he would have been referring to the sort of practices of praying to the gods for the fires to end, or so that I can get what I want in life, or I can have a baby boy instead of a girl. You know what I mean? Whatever people might have wanted. I never prayed for that, by the way, but but people do, unfortunately, in some cultures. all these things, people made offerings to the gods, to lots of gods, very sincerely, no doubt. But there was the idea, when I think about it, it very much still exists in our society today. The idea that if I, there's sort of a magical notion. If I do follow these steps, then there'll be this outcome, you see. And very sincere, but confused, and the Buddha pointed people back to what they were doing, their own behavior, what's happening in their thoughts, what's happening in their speech, what's happening in their actions. And there's a I guess it was an Indian television series on the life of the Buddha, called Buddha, I think, in which there's a lovely scene where Shakyamuni, after his enlightenment, he's wandering and people are starting to follow him, and he meets Macaca Show before he has his disciple, who is actually by then already a great teacher and sage, and he's asking the Buddha some questions and about this, what about our practices? They were slaughtering animals, and sacrifice has been a big part of religion since the very early days of religion. Sacrificing, unfortunately, sometimes human beings, but animal sacrifice. Something had to pay for something good to happen, right? So it's that kind of ritual that the Buddha pointed to. And interestingly enough, there's threads of this in our society today, and I think it's really helpful to identify it. And the reason I'm going into all this, and I won't go into too much detail, is because this is different from what we're aiming at in our ceremonies, right? But we could possibly go there, But what he said to the Macaca Show, to be, was simple. He had these wonderful simple analogies and similes in his teaching. Was that if somebody wants to get to that point in the river, they're sitting next to a river over there, that part of the river. How are they going to get there? If they sit on the shore and pray to the gods and make offerings, and with the sincerest heart, wish to get over there, are they going to be able to get there? So he went through various possibilities, and Macaca Show thought, oh, wow, yeah, just cut through his notions, if you like, elaborated perceptions and notions. It cut through his belief system, and he realized, no, wow. And so the Buddha pointed out, the guy's you have to get in a boat, you got to do some work, you got to swim, or in other words, you're part of the equation. We're part of the whole. We're part of it. And that was really revolutionary. And I can only touch on the profundity of this, of course, that happened. And it started an awakening in Macaca Show, and then he immediately became the Buddha's disciple. So that's the kind of thing that the Buddha warned about. And I found it helpful to look at my own life. And even as sacristan, here I'm the sacristan now, when you're setting things up for a ceremony, you can get very stuck with everything having to be just so. And at the same time, we make every effort to set it up in a beautiful way, in the way that it's supposed to be, the way we're taught. So there's, again, a sort of paradox there. But the attitude of mind that I bring to it as a sacristan is probably more important than exactly where I place everything. But at the same time, it's important for me to have the humility to follow my teacher and my abbess's instructions and our traditions, the practices of our tradition, and do it in the way that we were taught, knowing that it could be done a bit differently too, and it wouldn't mean that we would be horribly heretical necessarily, but this is just the way we do it. And yet the attitude of mind that I do it with is all important. Again, when we come together for a ceremony, our attention, our careful attention that we give to our presence, to our being together, many people of different backgrounds, perhaps many different beliefs, maybe different views, yeah, and personalities, and yet coming together with the same intention, together seeking right views. What happens in our thoughts, in our minds, is very significant in terms of influencing the course of our future and the future of others. So working back to what's going on with our thoughts and intentions is really important. So, again, the ceremony gives us an opportunity, I think, to move into a bigger perspective together, a much bigger identity that sets up conditions, to my mind, for peace, for goodwill, for harmony, for release from suffering. However, whatever form that might take. If nothing else, we could probably respond to an emergency with greater attention and kindness, right? Which is itself a huge thing. And we don't have to necessarily rationalize it all, but the point is, these ceremonies help us in getting to right view, right thought, at the same time help us to, they give us a model for how to live our daily lives as well. When we pay attention to what we're doing with our bodies, we pay more attention to what we're doing with our minds, since body and mind are fundamentally one. So with right view, everything teaches and helps us, and all things point to the truth. Even our suffering can be seen as our Buddha nature showing us that we've been depending on and relying on, as I mentioned, what is insubstantial, which results in painful feeling. Yeah, unsubstantial is, I guess, the right word. I'm going to quote to end with this lovely part of this offertory that Reverend Aller did a nice job of singing this morning, where he, in the offertory for this memorial, it says, when we're one with enlightenment, we know that there's complete immaculacy, complete purity, as is spoken of in the scripture of great wisdom, emptiness. There's complete immaculacy and universal light. Utter quietness embraces the sky. When we return to the world, we know that everything is as a dream. Well, when I was a young person, in my teens, especially late teens, perhaps some of you have had this experience too, I found myself becoming rather disillusioned with religion, and probably I just didn't understand it, and so didn't practice anything in particular for a while, not formally anyway, but eventually did find Buddhism, gratefully, at a young age, which was a real lifesaver. But I began to realize, after some years of training, that maybe most of us have this. We have a bit of experience that life is, a good part, many parts of our lives are as a dream, Maybe we have had some positive experiences that show us things more as they truly are, but we didn't have the guidance, perhaps, to realize what right view was, And I think that speaks to what right view is, meaning that we don't have to hang on to the past. Often we suffer from clinging to something wonderful that happened, a relationship, our memories. They're fine. It's fine to recall them all, but just to not cling to them. Or really awful things that might have happened, difficult things that might have happened. And like the dog, going round and round the post, we're still going round and round and trying to figure out when did that, what happened there, who did what, and so on and so forth. And again, we see a lot of that happening in our world. With our practice of meditation, ceremonies, the scriptures, the precepts, we begin to see these things as a dream. Not that they didn't happen, but they're not happening now. And we can have a different perspective. And we can just let the dream fade and let things fall off as they can. If something needs to be recalled, it will come up naturally. I found that teaching has given me great peace. And I think often we don't allow ourselves to move on enough. As Reverend Master Jiyu was fond of saying to us, don't cling to the past or dwell on the past, and don't fear the future. Live now without evil. Live now, as she says in her commentary on the precepts. Live now, being at one with the eternal and appreciating what we have now. and going forward with that. So I'll leave you with that today, some of her teachings and reflections on bits and pieces, maybe the beginnings of a tapestry, I think. To be continued. Thank you for coming today. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha.